with Cosmos, we did this, it was called Game of Stakes, this kind of incentivized testnet. Today, incentivized testnets are pretty common, but that was the first one. With many crypto networks, I would say most crypto networks, even not all of them, that they often have some kind of dynamic, right, where either over time or with more assets being staked, the rewards go down.
I have one question that is quite interesting, is that like, which blockchain are you the most bullish on, and is it the blockchain you are the most deployed on with Chorus One?
Right, it's inevitable that people are going to say, hey, I want to use this capital more efficiently in different ways and generate additional yield. I mean, Ethereum basically made the decision quite some while ago that they don't really want to scale the base layer, but they want to scale through layer 2s.
2 years ago, you said during the interview with Sammy from GÉANT that you thought there were like a 50% chance that the Flippening will happen one day. Like, do you still, it's like a 50% chance, or is it like a lower, or is it higher? Like, I mean, a lot of things has changed, right? Hello à tous l'équipe, j'espère que vous allez bien. Aujourd'hui, on se retrouve pour une nouvelle interview, un nouveau podcast. Cette fois-ci, j'ai le plaisir de recevoir Brian Crain, qui est tout simplement un crack, qui a été notamment, je crois, la 4e personne à rejoindre Tendermint, qui est donc à l'origine du Cosmos Hub, tout simplement. Et qui a aussi derrière créé Chorus One, qui est un énorme staker, notamment du côté institutionnel. Donc je pense qu'il y a beaucoup de sujets à explorer, puisqu'il a une énorme expérience, notamment du côté de Tendermint, du Cosmos Hub, et surtout de la validation de nombreuses chains. Donc voilà, profitez bien, et on commence tout de suite. Hello Brian, how is it going?
Hey, thanks so much for having me on. I'm doing great.
It's a pleasure. I mean, like, a few people recommended me to interview you. And when I watched like an interview from Sammy from GÉANT, I was pretty shocked about your background. So I'm very excited about all the topics I have in mind for today. But before doing so, could you maybe introduce yourself and explain basically what you're doing and what you did?
Sure, yeah. My name is Brian. I'm originally from Switzerland, but I left Switzerland after high school and, lived in a bunch of different places. And, it was kind of for a while. I mean, I was studying economics as an undergrad and I was interested in tech and startups as well. But, was sort of trying to find something to do for quite a while and couldn't really find anything that really, truly captured my inspiration. And then I learned about Bitcoin in 2013, so around 11 years ago. And that was immediately, it was just sort of a, wow, this is so cool. And this is, the future. And so then I basically kind of went all in on crypto back then. And, have been in the crypto space since then. And, done a whole bunch of different stuff. But maybe most significantly, I was maybe like a few things. I mean, one is I started a podcast, which is still running. So that's like the oldest crypto podcast at this point. And then I was also very involved in Tendermint, the Cosmos ecosystem. And then last few years, 6 years or so, 6.5 years now, have been building a staking business called Chorus One.
I mean, I'm pretty shocked because as a podcaster, I'm interviewing like another podcaster. And it seems that you've been doing that like for so many years, like probably 10 years, something like that, which is crazy. I was wondering, like, as a staking company and also as a podcaster, what kind of advantage does it give you over the market? Like, are you able to, I would see things more quickly than other companies or other individuals? Like, what kind of benefits does it give you being like a podcaster and also being like a staking provider?
Yeah, I mean, I think in the beginning, it gave us certainly a lot of advantage, right? Because with Epicenter also as a podcast, we were always very broad. So we were doing podcasts about, like all kinds of topics, all kinds of different L1s. So, when we started Chorus One, I think it was definitely a significant benefit that, I just knew a lot of people because I had interviewed a lot of people. And I think to some extent it also helped a bit because, we had some brand with the podcast and personally. And so then maybe people were like more familiar with us and more likely to stake. And then I think maybe the other thing that you're alluding to, I think is also the case, right? Because I'm, because of these podcasts, right, we kind of just always trying to figure out a little bit where are things going, speaking with new projects. And so I think in terms of maybe being a bit more up to date and a bit more on the the cutting edge of tech and crypto. Of course, that's also very relevant, right, for any crypto business, but certainly for ours.
You mentioned like in your past interview with Journal du Coin that you were kind of a big fan of the founder of Avalanche, but at this time, at the very beginning of Avalanche, you didn't really invest it. So this is something basically you said you regretted. But did you add like another similar thing happening to you, or did you learn your lesson so far?
No, certainly. I mean, I think there's been many, I guess like anyone, who's been in crypto for a long time, there's always going to be things you miss, right? So I think certainly there's many more examples like that.
Okay. So you mentioned that you created Chorus One, but at the very beginning, you didn't seem like a very technical person. I think you mentioned that you were like the fourth person to join Tendermint, and at this time that was like a very small team, but you were not technical at all. And then after that, you created Chorus One. Like, how hard is it for someone like you that was not very technical to create such a technical company?
Yeah, I mean, so when I started Chorus One, I started with my co-founder Maher, who and we are both not very technical. I mean, he had the role of the CTO, and I was the CEO. Now he was, but he's very brilliant. He's really great at research, really great at like going very deep on topics, and including technical things. However, he never worked as a software engineer. He's not really a coder, even if he can kind of read code. And he never worked in like infrastructure, like operating crypto infrastructure. So in the beginning, it was definitely a challenge. Like first when we had to like hire our first engineers, we were like, okay, how do we interview people, right? So that was not easy. I think we also got some hires wrong in the beginning. I don't think today it's really an issue, because we have a lot of engineers, and it's just I focus on different things. But in the beginning, for sure. I mean, I think people who, someone else who would have started the same company, but having had a background, especially in, let's say DevOps type thing, I think would have been able to be like way, way faster for the first like year or 2 years probably, or maybe even more. So I think it was definitely some disadvantage, but of course we had other advantages.
And did you like learn to code like at a time in your life, or you've been able to do all of this without learning how to code basically?
I mean, I had spent some time learning how to program like a little bit, actually before that. So I'd learned a little bit of Python, JavaScript, some things, but, not to the extent that it was really useful. I wasn't able to do much. And it wasn't, I don't think it was of any help when it came to Chorus One. And then I never learned it. I'm basically incompetent when it comes to programming.
Maybe one day, you never know.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec dYdX. dYdX est la solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà dYdX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
So you mentioned that you created Chorus One. What is it? What is it about? What are you doing like most of your day?
Yeah, so we created Chorus One. We started working on Chorus One at the basically end of 2017. So this was, I was at Tendermint at the time. So Tendermint, the company which was building the Cosmos Hub and kind of Cosmos SDK, the Cosmos Network, and which was supposed to launch soon. So we basically started Chorus One shortly before Cosmos was supposed to launch. In the end, ended up taking a bit longer, and it wasn't that soon, but still. But of course, in addition to Cosmos, we had many other proof of stake networks. They were all in development at the time. They were all planning to launch. So these were things like Polkadot, Tezos, many others too. Ethereum too. I mean, Ethereum. Maybe people are not so aware of it, but the Ethereum white paper, which was published at the end of 2013, it already had in there, hey, we are going to switch from proof of work to proof of stake. And Ethereum was even thinking at the beginning of like, oh, should we just go to proof of stake? And then they thought like, oh, it's too immature. Let's do proof of work first and proof of stake later. So, when we started Chorus One, I think it was already very clear that, the future of blockchains was going to be proof of stake, because, all these new blockchains were all being built on proof of stake. And at the same time, basically none of the proof of stake networks were live already. So we were, okay, we want to build infrastructure for proof of stake network, operate infrastructure for proof of stake networks. It was also something that, as someone who was building a proof of stake network, working on a proof of stake network, you had in the protocol, you had this thing of like, oh, there's going to be these validators and they have this fundamental role in the protocol. But it wasn't really clear of who are these validators going to be, where they're going to come from. Are there going to be people showing up and doing it? So it was a kind of like a concern whether like actually there would be people really to be there and do it. Of course, that was like pretty much immediately not the case. With Cosmos, we did this, it was called Game of Stakes, this kind of incentivized testnet. Today, incentivized testnets are pretty common, but that was the first one. And immediately there was, lots of people who came up. Lots of people who were like, hey, I know how to run a node. I like crypto. I want to be part of it. But when we started, it wasn't clear that was going to be the case. So we basically we just saw that proof of stake was going to be very important to how to secure crypto networks in the future. And we saw that was as an opportunity for us to kind of contribute to crypto and, to also be part of a new industry at the beginning.
How competitive is this industry when it comes to staking? Because I know a lot of companies being staking providers, helping institutional to stake their token, same as on the retail side. So how did you manage to be successful? And does your competitors affect your business in any ways, or is it quite easy to operate?
Yeah, I mean, I think today proof of stake is a very competitive industry. I think one of the reasons for it is that the barrier to entry is pretty low. Right? It's pretty easy for somebody to go and run a validator. Even single people can do it. Actually, we did this thing. Sometimes we invite people to give a talk at course one to our team to sort of share a bit of their experience. And we invited this guy called Polkachu. I don't know if you've heard of it. It's it's a validator. And this is one person. He's running 80 different networks, something like that. So we had him come on and talk about his experience. So you can see that even really small teams can get in and run validators. And of course that's great, right? That's also the idea of proof of stake, is that you make it easy to run validators. And that's pretty much the case for, all the networks, even Solana. People often criticize Solana that barrier to entry is high, you have to have expensive hardware. But it's still it's not that expensive, right? Someone can one person can run a Solana validator. So I think there's that. So on the one hand, kind of the barrier to entry is small and it's easy to get in. However, if you then think about really serving more institutional customers, then it gets much more complicated. So then you have to have, for example, probably integration with custodians. You have to be integrated with BitGo, Anchorage, places like that. That's pretty difficult because they only want to integrate, limited number of parties. You probably need to support a lot of different networks, right? Because as a institutional, as somebody who will stake, they don't want to stake with a different party for every network. So they want to stake with 1, 2, 3, 4 partners. So then they want to have partners who support lots of different networks. Then you have other requirements, for example, we did this ISO certification, some external security certification. We do that. Rewards reporting, so that we give them kind of rewards about reports about
a dashboard, something like that.
Dashboards for their accounting, things like that. Not easy to build. So then you get into a lot of additional requirements that come in when it comes to the kind of higher standard expectations of institutional providers. And of course, brand is really important. People have to know you. And so it becomes I think the requirements become much harder to compete, but still, there's a good number of companies that I think are at this level. And so it's certainly competitive. I think in terms of, what helped us, I think the biggest thing that helped us is that we were so early. We were basically the first, right? Yeah. Now, we were the first, but there were other people around the same time. Right. So like companies like Figment, they were probably like a few months after us. And then you had, P2P.org, basically around the same time, right? So there's Stakefish, right? Same time. So there was actually, it was really the beginning of the Cosmos network that I would say was also the beginning of the proof of stake industry. Because when we had this incentivized testnet for Cosmos, a lot of these companies were there. And it's kind of interesting today, that like many of the largest staking companies, they all came from that. They all were started around 2018. And so, of course, there's some that came later and had success as well. But even today, right, most of the large companies came from there. So I think that was our biggest advantage was, being there in the beginning and then just sticking through it. And of course, there's a lot of work, right, a lot of improvements to do. But I feel that was certainly very, very crucial for us.
What kind of customers do you have? Like, what's the typical customer? Is it like a crypto native company, exchange, hedge fund, or whatever? Or is it also outside of crypto? Because most of the time when we say institutional demand and blah, 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 and like, we're like, yeah, like we are onboarding new people. But like, is it truly the case? Like, how big also is the demand for those kind of solutions outside of crypto?
Yeah, I mean, so for us, in terms of the customers, right, there's we have a lot of individuals, staking with us. These can be small people having a few coins, or it can be whales, staking large amounts. Then we work with a lot of VC funds. So that's like a primary customer segment for us. Then we work with a lot of custodians. We work with, some exchanges, some wallets, things like that. But I think when you say like institutions, today the institutions that engage with staking, they are still primarily kind of like crypto institutions, like now it's starting to be the case more like, traditional institutions, let's say like a bank, will start to, they kind of start approaching this. And I think there's starting to be some early things there, but it's still pretty early. And I think in general, if you think of like more traditional institutions, there tends to be kind of a clear sequence of steps that they go through, right? The first thing would be like, custody often, right? The bank says, oh, hey, I'm going to offer that you can hold your Bitcoins with the bank. So that would be one thing. That on its own is like a big step. Probably will take a bank like several years of work to get to the point where they're able to do that. They have to figure out all kinds of stuff. Once they have that, then maybe they say, oh, we're going to do Ethereum too or something. And then maybe they're going to say, oh, we're going to offer trading, right? So that you can basically, do some sort of OTC trading or something like that. And then I think after that comes probably staking, right? Then they might be like, oh, now we're going to start doing ETH staking. So I think it's something that's like starting to happen like very little bit. But I think still the vast majority of staking happens for more like crypto native institutions.
But did the ETF kind of brought some demand, especially on the Ethereum side? Like, because maybe like institutions and like big names are like, oh, now there is an Ethereum ETF and there is no staking or whatever. So maybe I want to do staking on my own or those kind of things. So did it kind of, I would say, accelerate the demand for it on your side, or it's not significant at all for now?
I don't think the ETH ETF had really an impact. I mean, I think Ethereum...
It's too recent?
Yeah, I think more demand for Ethereum staking had already been happening. I mean, it's been happening for a while. As you mentioned, right, like the ETH ETFs in the US are launching. They don't have staking allowed yet. There are some kind of ETFs, so sometimes they're called ETPs, like exchange traded products in other places that do have staking, but these are like very small amounts and they don't have a lot of funds in there. We work with some of we're working on launching some things like that too. But I think today I would say ETFs are not yet a significant driver of staking, but I think that is probably going to change, right? Because in the end, for any kind of traditional investor, ETF is just really easy to hold their assets in. and they don't have to figure out custody, key management, any of these things. People can maybe hold it through, retirement accounts, or, they don't have to worry about a lot of things that become factors when you hold crypto directly. So I think for the more traditional institutions, I think ETFs are going to be super attractive and probably will end up becoming a big driver also of, staking, staking funds and staking revenues. So I do expect that to happen.
Historically, the demand for ETH staking is kind of increasing. So we have like more and more people staking their ETH, more and more ETH that are staked. And so basically the reward rate, the APY is decreasing. Is it something concerning to you in any ways? Does it has like any impacts like on your business, on the industry? And also, do you see it as kind of like a source of degen behaviors, maybe related to restaking, because the APY for like ETH staking is decreasing. So people maybe are trying to extract more yield like on other sides, on other places. And this is where where restaking got some traction. So what are your perspectives on this?
Yeah. I mean, I think it's, first of all, it's the case with many crypto networks, I would say most crypto networks, even not all of them, that they often have some kind of dynamic, right, where either over time or with more assets being staked, the rewards go down. So that's the case for many networks, not all of them, right? For example, in Cosmos network, sometimes you just have a fixed inflation that applies forever. I think Solana is also like that. But many of them, it goes down. And in Ethereum, I think it's even more, it's even stronger like that, because it goes, the inflation rate goes down with more being staked. So then you have two effects, right? Because more ETH is being staked, so the inflation is being distributed among more ETH, and more ETH is being staked, so the inflation rate is also decreased. So Ethereum has a pretty strong factor like that, which has led to the staking APR going down. Of course, for us, it kind of, there's like two things here, right? One is that, of course, to maintain revenues, because we just charge revenues based on the staking rewards, we need to get additional stake, right? And of course, it is still the case that, if the staking APR goes down, then it has some downward pressure on revenues. Now,
you need to ETH to go to 10K.
Yeah, exactly. The other factor, of course, is the price, right? Because you'd hope also that in these networks, I mean, what you'd hope generally with these networks to happen is a few things. One is that the price hopefully goes up, right? So then that can more than compensate, right, for the losses. And the other thing is that the revenues, when it comes to ETH staking, for example, they come from a few different sources, right? They come from the inflation. They also come from MEV, and they come from transaction fees, right? So if we see a lot of demand for ETH, then that also increases the revenues. And if you see a lot of, trading and MEV, then that also increases the revenues. But those are much more volatile, right? They go up and down a lot with the current market. I think your other point that, what is the impact it has on the individual users? I think you're totally correct that the decrease in the, ETH staking APR, it creates an incentive for people to say, hey, I'm going to do some things that are more experimental and, do things like restaking. I mean, there has recently been, discussion on Ethereum for, hey, should we decrease the inflation rate more because we want to have less ETH staked, right? So there was some sort of idea like that. It's actually desirable if not so much ETH is being staked. And, I think that's a bit of a misguided thing, right? Because even for this point exactly, that a lot of people are staking the ETH even more so because they want to restake it and getting additional yields that way. And that's a big driver of additional ETH staking. And so I think decreasing the inflation rate, is that going to have that effect? Not so sure. But yeah, definitely restaking, I think, is a big area that is sort of driving, interest. And
do you like it or do you hate it? Because it kind of creates, I would say, systematic problems for the ecosystem, or at least where I can kind of like adding more and more layers of risk including the concentration of ETH being staked in a few providers, such as Lido. So you have this, and then in addition to this risk, you add like restaking. So are you worried about this? And is restaking truly innovative and the future of Ethereum in some ways? Or are you kind of dubitative about it?
Avant de poursuivre cette vidéo, je t'invite tout simplement à rejoindre mon Discord dans lequel tu peux retrouver plus de 10 000 traders actifs. Dans ce Discord, on parle de nombreuses choses, notamment on va tout simplement partager nos analyses, nos graphiques, sur quoi on spécule, les différents airdrops qu'on farm, les news en temps réel qui sont partagées par exemple sur Twitter ou sur différents sites. Enfin bref, c'est vraiment un moyen d'être à jour sur ce qui se passe dans l'écosystème. Et en plus de ça, sur ce Discord-là, je vais partager tout simplement pas mal de données et pas mal de choses que je surveille personnellement, donc des données qui sont importantes à mes yeux et tout simplement moi personnellement ce que je surveille au quotidien. Donc ça permet vraiment d'avoir un suivi en temps réel de moi, ce que je regarde et comment je me positionne dans l'écosystème. D'ailleurs, tu peux retrouver mes performances de 2022 et 2023 sur tous les trades que j'ai partagés gratuitement et publiquement. Donc ici, tu as absolument tout le détail avec les positions disponibles de manière transparente, mes positions actives, mon folio, ainsi que tous les trades que personnellement je prends de mon côté avec le suivi de comment je déplace mon stop loss, comment j'ajuste mon risque, comment je me positionne, etc. J'espère que ça vous plaira. Tout est gratuit. Je vous invite à rejoindre. Tout sera en description, en commentaire épinglé. Et maintenant, place à la vidéo.
Yeah, so it's a good question.
I know it's tricky for you.
yeah, it's a good question. It's a good topic. I mean, first of all, I think this concept has really been around like for a long time, and it's a pretty obvious idea, right? Like, for example, if we take the Cosmos networks, right, then let's say you're staking Atom or something like that, then actually the amount that you can be slashed is only 5%. So let's say you're staking 100 atoms, only 5% could theoretically be slashed if your validator was a double sign. So 95 of it, it's really not a risk. It's like locked up, but it's not doing much. So I think the idea of like, hey, can we use this capital at the same time to secure additional things and then to earn more rewards? Like that idea, I think, has been around for a long time. We've seen things like that being explored in the Cosmos ecosystem. Of course, you could say something like Polkadot, right? Where you have, one validator set with dots that's securing lots of different chains. That's kind of like a restaking type thing too. And, now we have that happening with Ethereum, with EigenLayer, and Symbiotic. So I think from a high level perspective, it's inevitable, right? It's inevitable that people are going to say, hey, I want to use this capital more efficiently in different ways and generate additional yield. So I think
anyway, it is permissionless. So
you
what
cannot
can you
stop
do about
people.
it?
Yeah. I think it's obviously happening. You can't stop people, and I think it's fundamentally like a natural thing. It's a good thing. Now, of course, when it comes to the details, certainly it could cause different problems and issues, right? I guess the sort of scenario that one can imagine would be that, you have a bunch of different, like you have the same asset, right, being used to secure a bunch of different chains. And then, like maybe it gets slashed somewhere. And then that means now the security for some other protocol is not there. Maybe that becomes vulnerable. And then, maybe that could cause some sort of, cascade of failures. I don't know how likely that is. To be honest, I haven't seen any design. I mean, the moment, actually,
EigenLayer had no slashing, right?
Exactly. Today, EigenLayer doesn't have slashing. Now, they are going to introduce slashing. So I think probably by the end of the year, both EigenLayer and Symbiotic are going to have slashing and AVSs.
So we're safe for now.
Yeah, we're safe for now. And of course, people sometimes make the analogy to the financial crisis, right? With the mortgages, you have these mortgage-backed securities. But I think a big difference is that is actually the transparency of blockchains, because in the end here, all of this data, everything that's happening and the risk, it's all on chain. You can see it, somebody can investigate it, and people can deal with it, right? Which is quite different from what you had in the traditional financial systems where, somebody would have some sort of mortgage-backed security that they can trade, but they wouldn't actually be able to inspect the underlying assets that were part of it. So let's say all the mortgages that were in there and the quality of those and whether these were underwater or not. So I think the transparency of blockchains is a big advantage here. But then, I'm sure what is going to happen is that, some of these restaking things are going to blow up. And, I think that's inevitable,
Please
right?
Stop.
Yeah.
But so basically we can't do anything about it. I mean, it will, like, people will go through restaking and everything. But in terms of growth, what are your expectations? Like, is it such a big deal, or is it kind of overhyped for now?
Restaking, you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a good question, right? Because I think one of the challenges also is that if you compare restaking with normal staking, so with normal staking, you create some asset that's like specific to your project, right? So you have Solana for Sol, some other asset for some other chain. People buy this asset because they like your project, right? And then they stake it, and then they just earn some additional coins, right? So if you look at the staking rewards that are being paid, they don't really, like, it doesn't really make sense to think of it as a cost, right, to the network. Because if everyone just gets 10% more coins, it's sort of like you didn't really lose much, right? So one way to think about it, like, what is the actual cost of securing a blockchain, or that a blockchain pays for its security? Then one way to think about it is you say, hey, we take the inflation, and then you take what is sort of the average commission rate that goes to validators, and that's the real cost, right? So let's say now you have a $100 million asset. It pays 7% inflation, so 7 million a year in inflation. Most of that just goes back to the token holders. But let's say on average 5% or 8% are being paid as inflation, right, to the validators. That's like $500,000, right, a year. So now this blockchain would maybe pay $500,000 on a market cap of $100 million per year to the validators for running the chain and for securing it. Kind of reasonable, right?
Yeah.
But now if you have restaking, then the asset that's being restaked is not your own asset, right? It's not the asset from the people who are the investors of this project, who care about this project, and like who want to hold more of this asset. The asset that's being restaked is like something like Ethereum, right? And the thing that the Ethereum person wants, right, who's restaking Ethereum, they just want more Ethereum, right? They want a higher Ethereum APR. So probably what's going to happen is that the staking reward but the network that's using restaking for security, they don't have Ethereum to pay for it, right? So they're going to use their own token to pay. So now I'm restaking the ETH. You have your own coin that you're paying me as for the security. I don't care about your coin, right? I don't want to have like 40 different coins. I just want more ETH. Yeah. So I'm going to sell it, right? And I'm going to sell it probably like automatically, or I'm going to sell it whenever I can. So it means that I think that the rewards that are going to be paid on restaking, they're basically going to be all dumped like immediately, right?
So it is buying pressure for ETH, and it is kind of a threat for some chains.
I mean, maybe it causes some buying pressure
economically, like from a price perspective.
I mean, I think the effect is going to be that like the chains or the projects that are going to use restaking for security, I think they're gonna figure this out very quickly, or they're aware of it already. So they're going to be really hesitant to like pay a lot of rewards to restakers, because it's just going to put downward pressure on their price. So I think that's one of the challenges with restaking. So in the end, they really can only, like, let's say in this example we had before, right? We have $100 million market cap coin. If it's its own chain, maybe paying $7 million a year in staking rewards is fine, right? But the equivalent in restaking, I mean, they can pay like $300K or something like that, or $400K a year to get the same level of downward price pressure, right? Yeah. So I think that is going to be a challenge. And so we kind of have to figure this out. I think it's also maybe a bit of a general question of like, how much is it really worth? like to have, like if you have your own chain, do you care that much that there's now like $1 billion worth of Ethereum that's like restaked to you and also restaked to 10 other chains at the same time? Does it really give you a lot of security? How much is that worth in terms of money and compensation? So I think there are a lot of questions, right, around the economics of it. I feel right now it's also been a little bit the case that a lot of these eigenlayer projects, these AVSs, they kind of just try to use it as like marketing because they're like, hey, we have like $4 billion or $2 billion worth of ETH that's like restaked with us. Hence, my token should be worth more because it sort of like sounds good. But that's a very flawed argument, right? I think there's no really substance to that. So I think there's a lot of questions on how this whole thing is going to play out and how sound, how the economics of it are going to work. I think the symbiotic, so for people who are aware, like symbiotic is kind of like an eigenlayer alternative, I think is pretty interesting.
By Lido, right? Or at least by Lido, right? By Lido, yeah.
Well, it's not exactly by Lido, but
members of it.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's definitely it's a bit more. So I think the one of the companies that funded it is Cyberfund and kind of incubated it. And Cyberfund is sort of the fund of Konstantin who started Lido. But Symbiotic, for example, is a bit more flexible because in Symbiotic, they really allow you to stake any asset. So a project can choose what assets they want. And so, for example, one of the projects that's building on Symbiotic is a project called Ethena that I'm sure many have heard, right? It's just basically this stable coin on Ethereum.
Oh, trading strategy or
trading strategy, stable coin. Yeah, depends how you look at it exactly. But they say, oh no, it's not ETH that you're staking there. It's going to be ENA, so their own token, or USDE, their stable coin or hopefully stable coin. And that of course makes more sense for something like Ethena, right? Because they don't want to pay ENA or USDE rewards to like ETH holders. They're just gonna, they want to kind of keep it in their ecosystem. So I think, but yeah, I think it's super overall. I think restaking, it's extremely early. It's very immature still. I think we're going to see a lot of experiments, and I'm sure a lot of them are going to not work. But in the end, I think as a fundamental thing, it is a real thing, right? Like people are going to try to leverage assets in more ways and to secure more services and generate more yield. I think that as a sort of fundamental thing, I do think is real and it's going to happen. And I think it's going to end up being big in the long run.
When it comes to being bullish on ETH, does like the growth of L2s and their tokens and blah, blah, blah is like a good thing for ETH, or like, is it a bad thing, or is it like more like a bad thing at the short term, a good thing at long term, or the inverse? Like, how do you see the growth of the L2s and the impacts on ETH? Because I mean, we'll talk about Cosmos Hub right after, but I'm kind of curious about your perspective on ETH. Because you might be one of the best person positioned in the industry to analyze the economics and what's going on this field, I guess. So, yeah.
Yeah, that's a really good question, right? It's a very good question, right? Because I think basically, right, we have the following, right? So we have all of these layer 2s, right? And now we've had the Ethereum upgrade, right? To basically, and the layer 2s are now one of the main, Ethereum basically made the decision quite some while ago that they don't really want to scale the base layer, but they want to scale through layer 2s. And then the layer 2s, the idea is they will use a lot of the block space in the layer 1 and that will kind of, drive also the Ethereum price, right? Because in the end, Ethereum has this system, right, with the EIP 1559, I think, where some of the ETH that's being paid in fees is being burned. And so kind of has this, upward price pressure, right, for Ethereum. But of course, the challenge is that from the L2 perspective, all of the ETH that they're paying to the L1 for its security, it's just a cost, right? Like, and the lower you can make this cost, the better for the L2. And so I think you've already seen now And Ethereum has now also added this new blob storage, right, where basically the L2s can sort of put some of the data into the L1 at a cheaper price, and that has really dramatically decreased the amount of gas or the amount of ETH that layer 2s are spending to the layer 1. And then,
so
of
it's
course,
more efficient, but it's worse in terms of buying pressure, I guess.
Absolutely, yeah. And then, of course, you have other ideas, and people say, "Oh, I'm going to do a layer 3, right?" For example, and layer 3 is basically same as a layer 2, but I'm using the layer 2 now to put my transactions in instead of the layer 1. So now, of course, the amount of ETH that's being spent is going to go down even way more. So I think it's so that's a negative, right? So I think it's very clear that probably in the long run, the amount of block space that's being used and gas that's being spent by layer 2s on Ethereum, I don't know how much that's going to be. So I think there's one perspective that layer 2s are really kind of parasitic to the layer 1. Of course, the flip side is that it makes it, most of the liquidity is in Ethereum. And so, for example, if you compare with Cosmos chains, there's really been a challenge with having enough liquidity, right? There's a lot of trading, and the DEXs have don't have much volume and stuff like that. So I do think there's been maybe some increase in projects that are saying like, hey, I just want to build like on Ethereum or L2 or something because they think that is going to help with liquidity. Of course, the challenge, though, is that when you have all these different layer 2s, it's all fragmented. So the liquidity is not, and the interoperability is not so great between them. So overall, how do I think all of this is for Ethereum? I mean, I think first of all, what is very clear is that there's a lot of network effects around the EVM and around Ethereum itself. So I think Ethereum is in a very strong position, and a lot of projects are.
You could argue why building on something else than EVM. Probably.
Yeah, exactly. It's just like the most developers, mature tooling, and then people
you have
liquidity.
Cosmos SDK, but it's kind of I would say weaker for now.
Which one?
Cosmos SDK.
Well, I mean, Cosmos SDK I think is actually doing good, right? There's a lot of usage on Cosmos SDK as well. But actually, one place where people also increasingly are using the Cosmos SDK is that they're saying, hey, I'm going to build some kind of ETH L2 that's using the Cosmos SDK, right? Or I'm building some avis. So that's something that's secured by Ethereum, but using the Cosmos SDK. So, or Tendermint is actually or Comet BFT is being used by quite a few of these rollups too. So we're seeing quite a lot of that. Where people basically say, oh, I'm going to use some of the Cosmos tech, but I want to kind of plug into the Ethereum liquidity.
And do my thing.
Yeah. I mean, I think another interesting question, for example, is in the long run, if an L2 is really successful, is it going to become more like an L1 at some point, right? Is it going to say, hey,
can it be fully kind of independent in terms of adoption and performance or whatever? I don't know. I mean, I'm bullish on the performance of the ETH ecosystem, the Ethereum ecosystem, but when it comes to price, this is a different thing. I mean, we have less pressure on the ETH token in some ways, but as a whole, it makes the Ethereum assets and the Ethereum ecosystem stronger. And so maybe people just want to bet on the strength of the Ethereum ecosystem and not just on the buying pressure on ETH that is brought by, the interest on the L1. I don't know. I don't know how big is the buying pressure for paying fees on ETH versus just speculating on the asset and on the industry.
Yeah. No, I mean, of course.
I'm quite curious on.
Yeah, I mean, no question. I think that most of the thing that's driving crypto prices, it's not the fundamentals on the fees, right? It's people it's the narrative. It's people thinking this is the future.
I mean, we're seeing that with meme coins.
For sure. Absolutely.
So yeah. I wanted to have your perspectives on what's happening on the Cosmos Hub and Cosmos SDK, because you've been deeply involved in Tendermint, which is kind of close of Cosmos Hub and everything. And you might be the best person to answer this question. So what's happening in this Cosmos Hub? And are you still bullish on Cosmos Hub and the Atom token in the other one? I guess you're bullish on Cosmos Hub and not on Atom, right? Or something like that?
So, yeah, I mean, I think Cosmos, right? Cosmos was really, I think Cosmos, big thing that Cosmos got right, was like this vision of sovereign interoperable app chains. I mean, I guess there's still some debate today, right? Still people are like, no, actually, it should all be on one chain, Solana, right? Or it should be like, I think there's basically three big visions, I think, in terms of blockchain architecture, right? There's the Solana thing. We have like one chain, maximum throughput, everything on that's composable. Then I think there's a sort of Ethereum vision where it's like, you know, one base chain and then everything is sort of like dependent and secured by that chain and like in some kind of way interwoven. And then I think there's the Cosmos vision of like sovereign interoperable app chains. And to some extent, they're also converging, right? Where like, for example, the Ethereum and the Cosmos vision, I think, have become a bit more similar with time. So I think no question that the Cosmos vision was great and it has gotten a lot of traction. And I personally still feel like I'm pretty bullish on the idea that we should have lots of different chains that have their own security, their own validator set, and they can interoperate with each other.
I mean, dYdX chain is great in my opinion. It's like yeah. It's like sovereign and like everything is working clearly. You have like staking rewards in real time. Everything's transparent. It's I don't know. Like to me, that's one of the best chain I tested on the Cosmos SDK because I'm more on the trading side. But I guess there are like other things that are very exciting.
Yeah, exactly. And I think it's just if you sort of zoom out, right? It's also I think the way that's most decentralized and scalable and flexible, right? Like, you know, you can have your own blockchain ecosystem in China, you know, with like Cosmos chains that are like interoperable and like it is just so flexible. So I think that's very bullish. Now, I think there are probably one thing is that I think as an ecosystem, the Cosmos ecosystem hasn't been super fast in terms of like technical progress and development, right? I think one of the challenges has been in Cosmos is actually the decentralization, where in other ecosystems, you have like one team that's like building the stack and they're like moving forward. In the Cosmos, we've had like a whole bunch of different teams building different parts of the stack. And they all have like other businesses that they're also like serving. So their kind of attention is a little bit split. And then they have to coordinate with the other teams that are building other parts of the stack. So I think that has been something that has, you know, made it, has, I think, slowed down or slows down the sort of development speed in the Cosmos ecosystem. So I think that's one factor. Now, the Cosmos Hub, but I think you always had this challenge, right? That like when Cosmos was created, right, the vision was, okay, we're going to have sovereign interoperable app chains, right? And there's no real like dependence of those chains on, you know, on anything else, right? Because they're sovereign, right? So the Cosmos Hub never had really a special status or a special role in the Cosmos ecosystem or network. And even in the beginning, right, even when Cosmos started, there was always the question of, oh, but like, how is the Cosmos Hub going to have value? And like, even if this works out, like, why is Atom going to have value? And I think there's a big contrast with, for example, something like Polkadot, right, where Polkadot said, hey, it's similar in some ways, right, because they said, hey, we're going to have chains that each chain can do their own thing. But all of the chains have to sort of go and they have to put up dots as security. And
yeah. So, I mean, Cosmos Hub doesn't really have like any royalties or copyrights or those kind of things, you know, and that brings like less like investments into Atom, which is kind of bad at the same time for the ecosystem in some ways. I don't know, or at least giving like a bad, I would say, a vision of the like ecosystem. Like from like a very retail investor perspective.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
But is it part of the philosophy of Cosmos Hub to not have like any royalties, copyrights? Is it something that has been discussed a lot or it's never was like a real topic?
No, I think this is I think fundamentally like a part of the Cosmos philosophy and architecture, right? Is that basically Cosmos Hub didn't have a special role. And I think if you compare Polkadot and Cosmos, it's kind of interesting, right? Because in Polkadot, they built in this mechanism of like, hey, if you create a parachain, you basically have to pay, to dots, right? Value goes to dots. And in Cosmos, we didn't do that.
Just like BitTensor also and other ones, yeah.
Yeah. Now, the positive side is that Cosmos has gotten way more adoption than Polkadot, right? So I think the Polkadot thing kind of didn't work, right? Because people
are like... find a mix of it, I guess.
Maybe it's a mix. Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think that I would say the current path, right? The current sort of plan of the Cosmos Hub is somewhere that mix, right? Because it is with, interchain security that like, you can say like, hey, most chains maybe want to be sovereign. They don't pay anything. But maybe some of them, they just want to use the Cosmos Hub validators and then they pay something to Atom, to the hub, right? So that's definitely one of the paths that, has been pursued with, some success. I mean, we have a bunch of like, good projects, right, that are using that, and a bunch of chains that are being secured by Atom. Now, I think it has not been a success in the sense of like creating a strong narrative for Atom, and it hasn't been a strong success in terms of, actually resulting in substantial revenues. So I think in terms of, the price, obviously Atom has not performed well. So yeah, I mean, I think that is certainly a concern. So I think if you see and I think it's to some extent, it's also a problem for like the Cosmos ecosystem, right? Because people then will equate Atom with the Cosmos ecosystem. They're like, oh, Atom's doing bad, Cosmos ecosystem's doing bad. But, actually, I think if I see like, because we speak all the time with new projects, right? They're launching new chains. So we see a lot of that. And there, I think in terms of, where's the most traction? I mean, I think the most traction is basically ETH rollups, right? Or some sort of like layer 2s or AVSs, like restaking secure chains, and Cosmos chain, right? Like those are the two biggest categories that we are seeing. So I think there's still a lot of teams building on the Cosmos SDK, right? So I think there's still strong traction there. But of course, yeah, it doesn't answer the question around the Atom and the role of the Cosmos Hub and how much value it can accrue.
Cette vidéo vous est présentée en partenariat avec dYdX. dYdX est la solution décentralisée qui vous permet de trader les principales crypto-monnaies de manière liquide sur mobile et ordinateur. Contrairement à la majorité des exchanges, vous n'avez pas besoin de vous KYC et vous récupérez la majorité des frais que vous payez. Plus de 60 000 personnes utilisent déjà dYdX et j'en fais partie, alors qu'attendez-vous? Scannez le QR code sur votre écran ou utilisez le lien dans la description pour créer votre compte avec un simple wallet et profitez de 5% de réduction sur vos frais. Allez, on repart sur l'interview.
2 years ago, you said during the interview with Sami from GÉANT that you thought there were like a 50% chance that the Flippening will happen one day. Do you still have the same thinking about it, the same thoughts? Like, do you still, it's like a 50% chance, or is it like a lower, or is it higher? Like what? I mean, a lot of things have changed, right?
That's a good question. Yeah. So I said 50% chance that Ethereum is going to flip in Bitcoin. Yeah. I mean, today, right, you're basically, Bitcoin is like 3 times roughly as high as Ethereum.
3.5.
I mean, I would put it maybe a little bit lower. I think if you ask me today, I think one thing that has been really cool, and I think that's a new thing, is this whole emergence of like Bitcoin ecosystem, right? So we've seen a lot of, tons of projects, right? That are building on top of Bitcoin. They're building kind of Bitcoin side chains, Bitcoin L2s.
Like Babylon, Stacks, and other ones.
Babylon, Stacks, Meso, like many different ones. And so there's really like a lot of innovation there. And of course, we've seen also on Bitcoin itself, we've seen this, NFTs there and stuff. So I think that is really bullish for Bitcoin. So I feel like today, with the very strong brand of Bitcoin, with that level of innovation and maybe a bit more risk on the Ethereum side, because they're just, there's so much changes they're constantly making, right? Like in terms of like how Ethereum fundamentally works, constantly changing that. So I think that also brings with it some risk. So I would say today, if you ask me right now, what's the chance of the flipping happening? I would probably put it more at like maybe 30%. So I'll take it down from 50 to 30.
And when it comes to OPCAT being integrated again into Bitcoin, is it like something that might happen in your opinion? And if it happens, how bearish is it for, I don't know, like Bitcoin or for Ethereum or Solana or the ones like, is it fine, or is it like?
I'm actually not super like up to date there.
Okay.
So I'm not sure.
No worries on that. I have one question that is quite interesting, is that like, which blockchain are you the most bullish on? And is it the blockchain you are the most deployed on with Chorus One?
Yeah, I mean, let me ask, first of all, the second question, most deployed on, I mean, depends a little bit what that means. I mean, we run a lot of different Cosmos chains. That's definitely one thing. Of course, we run a lot of ETH validators too.
Do you have any metrics to share about Chorus One? Because maybe people don't realize like how big is it?
Yeah, so I mean, we run around like over 60 networks today. So I think that's among the most from the kind of like larger institutional companies. And then I think today, we have around maybe 2.5 billion or something that's being staked with us. Something in that order. In terms of what ecosystem I'm most bullish on,
we didn't spoke about Solana.
Yeah, to be honest,
is it part of the answer?
I am bullish on Solana. Honestly, I'm bullish on Solana. I'm bullish on Ethereum. I'm bullish on Bitcoin, and I'm also bullish on Cosmos.
You need to estimate which one are you the most bullish on.
Yeah,
because this is where your convictions are, and probably where your money is, I guess.
Yeah.
So where is your money on? Like, are you mostly invested on Solana, on ETH, on Bitcoin?
I mean, personally, all of them, although actually the largest position would be Solana. I mean, we've been very involved.
I'm very bullish Solana. I bought at $20. I was very bullish on Twitter, so I'm not gonna say anything about it. But
go ahead. I mean, we've been involved in Solana from the very start, right? We were there, the first test nets. I invested in Solana in 29. I like 20 cents, right? In like one of the first
really
funding rounds. So
damn.
Yeah. So I and also of course we do hold actually quite a lot of Solana. So I would say we were pretty bullish Solana, but I mean, I don't think we're super opinionated there. We spend a lot of time on ETH. We spend a lot of time on Cosmos as well. We spent actually a decent amount of time on the Avalanche ecosystem too. So there's quite a pretty broad there. I know personally, I would say I was probably a bit more bearish on Ethereum in terms of like the roadmap, and I still feel mixed about the roadmap. But I also feel like there's just so much momentum in the community, and like it is very, So I would say I'm bullish on Ethereum as well. Cosmos ecosystem. I mean, Cosmos ecosystem is a bit different, right? Because in Cosmos ecosystem, it's really like I don't think it makes sense to speak about like the Cosmos ecosystem as much. But you're going to be bullish on like Osmosis or maybe Atom or
dYdX. But they have like 30% inflation, something like that.
Which one?
Osmosis is like 28% inflation.
No, I think it's gone down a lot, I think.
Yeah?
Yeah, I think
I heard
they've taken
something like that, so that's why I was worried about.
I mean, I'm still a big fan of Osmosis. I mean, like Sunny is like a good friend, also co-host in podcast.
Yeah, but token and the dApp, the chain is quite a different thing, Sometimes you're very bullish on the tech, but not on the token, which makes like a huge difference.
I mean, the inflation rate on Osmosis is 10% now, basically.
Okay. So. And when it comes to your experience as a staker, you might have like went into very technical details whenever you're like integrating like a new chain and or at least like enabling staking on new chains and everything. Have you ever been very disappointed by a chain on which like most people were bullish on? I know it's tricky, but like, is there any misconceptions about like some big chains around, or?
I mean, I guess I wouldn't say this is disappointing, right? But like, I mean, let me give you, so for example, one chain that we have onboarded now, we're working on, and where there's like, tons of attention on it, right? It's like Ton, right? And Ton is, for example, a very difficult chain to run, right? So at first our engineers were like, what is this, right? Like they're very like unhappy with it. Cause just, a bunch of the tooling isn't there. The staking logic is very complicated. And so it takes a lot of work, right, to do it well. But I think from our perspective, is an opportunity as well, right? Because if we can go in there, we can do it well, others struggling with it, then, that's really great. I mean, I think Ethereum is another chain, right? That from a staking perspective, it's really complicated, right? It's a ton of work. It's like way harder to run like a good Ethereum staking operation than like a Cosmos validator. So I think the degree to which, it's kind of like easy to run the chain doesn't always correspond very well with, the degree to which like a project is good, right? Because it's like, it's our job in the end to like run these chains. And then if the project's really good, there's a lot of adoption, the price is good, it has a future, it means it's also worth it more for us to like go through all this hassle and like and try to do it well. Of course, the flip side is if the project's not doing well and the chain is hard to run, then it's kind of like, right? Then those are also things we have to like offboard sometimes, right? Then we say like, okay, we stop supporting this protocol. But I think actually, I mean, of the big chains, I would say Ethereum is the most complex, right, to run, because there's no delegation, for example, right? Like that adds a lot of complexity, right?
Okay, final question, because I took like a lot of your time. Is are you more bullish on crypto now than compared to 2 years ago?
Compared to 2 years ago?
Yeah, are you more and more bullish on crypto, or maybe you've been disappointed, or there are like a lot of things you dislike? Because I kind of feel that we arrive in an era in which like a lot of people that have been there for a long time start to be disappointed, or frustrated about like the pace of the adoption of, or like maybe there is like too much infra, not enough devs, those kind of things, So yeah.
Yeah, right. Yeah, I mean, I would say if I think back, right, to like when I got into crypto, maybe going back more than 2 years. I mean, actually, we did a podcast like this with Epicenter, with like our host. I think when we did like 10 years of the podcast, we were talking about it like, how do we feel about the whole thing? And, definitely one thing that stood out to us was basically like, we've been in this for such a long time. And if you look at like the amount of users or the amount of applications that are there, it's actually pretty disappointing, right? And there's not that much. So I would say I definitely would have expected that, we would have more usage at this point, like more mass adoption, like that has been much slower than I expect. I think in terms of prices and, the industry growth, it's pretty good, right? Like, I think that has come a really long way, and that's great. But I think in terms of, the progress of technology, user experience, and applications and mainstream adoptions, I would say, yeah, I'm not super happy with it, right? I think really wish we could progress much faster, and I feel like we haven't done nearly enough.
Do you think that it will change anytime soon?
I'm not sure, right? So I think
because this is kind of like an existential question for us, I guess.
I don't know if it's an existential question, right? Because I guess we have seen that basically just from speculation, it's something. In the end, this entire industry is basically based on speculation. Like all the revenues is based on speculation. Like, by far the biggest part of the industry is like trading and exchanges, right? That means all speculation, right? Now, if you look at us, right? For example, okay, we run infrastructure, but we earn tokens of these different protocols, and the tokens have value because people speculate on the future of these protocols, right? And of course, people raise funding, right? From VCs or ICOs because of the speculation for the future, you know? So I think that speculation can keep going for a long time, and it can keep this industry growing for a long time. It just needs that people kind of, you know, believe the future is going to be bigger and better, and that new money is coming in to fuel that. Now, that new money coming in, I think in the end, you know, I feel like right now we're at a point where it's people are a bit like, you know, they don't really care that much. And it may more be the case that we need some kind of adoption. We need some things that support this narrative that, you know, crypto is the future, that will then bring in more money again to accelerate this whole thing. Now, is that going to happen soon? You know, I hope so. I think what we have now that we didn't have in the past is that I think we have the scalability solved, right? Like we can really build applications that should be able to support, you know, probably millions of users, right? Daily users.
So we have no more excuses, I guess.
Yeah, I think we don't have the excuses anymore. So we've got to do it. Yes.
Thank you very much for your time, Brian. It was a pleasure to have you on the podcast, really. Any last word for the French-speaking community?
Well, thanks so much for having me. And yeah, really pleasure to be here. If anyone's interested, you can find me on Twitter at CrainBF, or like if you're interested in staking, check out course.one. And yeah, I would love to hear from you.
I'll put everything in the description. Thank you very much, Brian.